So there I was, a sunny Tuesday morning, nursing my second cup of joe, when my phone buzzed to life. It was the kind of buzz that said, "Hale, put down the darn cup, you've got a mystery on your hands." It was the chief. Voice frantic, he spat out,
"It's the Eastwood mansion, Hale. Margot's gone missing."
Now, I've heard a lot about that grand old mansion. Every kid in town has a wild story about it. Most of them rubbish, but intriguing all the same. I thought, what could possibly happen in a dusty old mansion filled with, well, old stuff? But the Eastwood name, that's not one you hear and then stroll to. Margot Eastwood wasn't just anyone. She was the talk of the town, the enigmatic heiress with more mystery to her than the mansion itself. Kids called her Mirror Maiden, all because of her bizarre collection of antique mirrors. Stories floated around that she could talk to them or something. All kiddie tales, but fun to think about over a beer. I grabbed my hat and headed out, thinking this would probably be a case of some spoiled heiress throwing a fit, wanting some attention. Boy, was I in for a surprise. A short while later, I eased my car onto the gravel driveway of the Eastwood mansion. I've been to some fancy places in my time, but this joint? It was straight out of a classic Hollywood film, palatial, imposing. The kind of place where every creak and groan tells 1,000 stories. I took a moment to adjust my rumpled coat and tried to smooth out my hair with a quick swipe. "You're no James Dean Hale," I muttered to myself, smirking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The cracks on my face were more like a road map of regrets rather than rugged charm. The heavy wooden door opened before I even knocked. An old butler, looking like he'd served the house since its foundation, greeted me. I gave him a nod, my usual. Trust me, I'm a professional look. Though let's be honest, with my luck, he probably thought I was there to check the plumbing. The main hall was something else. Grandiose with high ceilings, tapestries hanging like silent witnesses, and at its center, the pièce de résistance, that peculiar mirror reflecting an image of Margot. Yet the room it showed was barren. It gave me the chills. A shiver traveled down my spine, and for a moment, I wasn't the rough-and-tumble detective. I was a curious child, mesmerized and spooked.
"Miss Eastwood was quite fond of that mirror,"
the butler said, breaking my trance.
"Said it was a rare 18th century piece, showed reflections from the past."
I snorted softly. Looks like the only thing reflecting here is my need for a pay raise. But my attempt to lighten the mood was lost on old Jeeves. The eerie part? The chair in the mirror's reflection was occupied by Margot, her eyes distant, almost lost. But here, in the tangible world, empty air. My fingers instinctively reached for the small flask in my coat pocket. A quick sip might have steadied my nerves. But I thought better of it. "Hale," I thought, "you've seen some freaky stuff, but a dame disappearing, that's a new one." As I circled the mirror, I realized I was on the verge of something bigger than a simple missing persons case. I tried to break the silence again, hoping it'd ground me. Maybe if I squint just right, I'll see a version of me from 20 years ago. No such luck. All I saw were more questions, a curious illusion, and the beginnings of what would be one hell of a twisted tale. The grandeur of Margot's study was something I've never seen. Wall-to-wall bookshelves, some as tall as my aspirations of once being a basketball star. Yeah, dreams die hard, but so do old habits. I reached for a cigar, but remembered the no smoking sign in ornate lettering by the door. Margot's touch, no doubt. I began my usual dance, you know, the one where you sift through the personal effects of someone you've never met, hoping to find a thread that leads somewhere. Anywhere. Stacks of books were littered everywhere. Most were about mirrors and their history. I scratched my head. Who'd need an entire library about shiny glass? But the deeper I dug, the more fascinated I became. There were old tales of mirrors used in rituals, others that spoke of reflections holding souls, and some downright creepy ones about trapped spirits. The kind of stuff that might have made me wet the bed as a kid. Heck, it still might. Margot's desk was a mess of notes, scribbles, and old photos. One particularly vintage pile of pages caught my eye. It was a journal entry detailing a specific mirror legend, the tale of a cursed reflection that could either trap a soul or release one. I chuckled. Sounds like my ex's idea of a relationship. But the more I read, the more I felt a connection. The tale detailed a woman eerily similar to Margot, strong, independent, and with an insatiable curiosity for the unknown. The legend said she vanished without a trace, only to reappear years later, unchanged, through the mirror she was last seen in. Intrigued, I pulled out my notebook, scribbling down key details. Just as I was about to delve deeper, a soft chime echoed through the mansion, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was the old grandfather clock in the corner of the room, heralding the late hour. I sighed, feeling the pressure of the mystery on my shoulders. This wasn't just a case anymore. After I read that journal entry, it felt personal. And if there's one thing I've learned in all my years of detective work, it's that personal feelings can either be a guiding compass or lead you straight off a cliff. Shoving the notes into my pocket, I stood up, taking one last look around the room. The shadows seemed to stretch and play tricks on my tired eyes. "Hale," I whispered to myself, "you're either onto something big, or you're losing your marbles, and given my track record, it's probably a bit of both." Leaving the confines of that mammoth house, I figured some fresh air would do me good. But this town, as small as it was, never let you breathe easy. Every corner cafe, every bar stool, and every park bench was like a front row seat to the world's most gossipy play. And today, I was the unwitting star. Stepping into Mabel's Diner, a place where coffee and rumors flowed equally strong, I was immediately met with sidelong glances and hushed whispers. From behind the counter, old Mabel herself shot me a look that could curdle milk.
"Look what the cat dragged in,"
she drawled, sliding a cup of her infamous coffee towards me. It tasted like burnt tires, but it was caffeine, and I wasn't about to complain.
"Here you're looking into the Eastwood business."
I sipped the drink, grimacing. "You hear a lot, don't you?" She laughed, a raspy, rich sound.
"Honey, in this town, if I didn't have my ear to the ground, I'd be out on the street."
Between sips of the tar-like brew, I gathered that Margot had recently been seen with members of the Reflection Society, a local group of oddballs who believed in the paranormal powers of mirrors. I chuckled at the thought. A society about mirrors. Sounds like a vanity project if you ask me, I said. A man a few seats down, beard long enough to trip on and eyes hidden behind thick glasses, chimed in.
"It ain't no joke, Detective. That society's been around for longer than you'd think. They believe mirrors are gateways. To what, you ask? Depends on who you're talking to."
His eerie proclamation sent a ripple through the diner. A couple at the corner table, looking more out of place with their high-end attire and brand-new smartphones, whispered among themselves. I wondered if they were part of this mirror cult, or just new in town, like birds watching a strange dance. I leaned in, intrigued despite myself. "So, Professor, you think there's something to it?" The bearded man shrugged.
"I've seen things, Mr. Hale. Things that'd make your gray hair stand on end."
I smirked. Man, the only thing that makes my hair stand on end these days is a good hair gel. And even then, it's a 50-50 shot. Despite the looming mystery, a few chuckles in a familiar place, surrounded by the town's oddballs, was just the dose of normalcy I needed. But as I left the diner, the weight of Margot's disappearance and the growing tales of mirrors and mysteries bore down on my thoughts. The tip-off about the Reflection Society sounded bonkers, but with nowhere else to turn, I decided to humor it. A quick ride later, I found myself at an unassuming brownstone, the unlikely headquarters of the Reflection Society. The venue was not at all what I expected. I thought they'd be gathering in some spooky, decrepit mansion, or perhaps an old theater, with dust more loyal than its patrons. Instead, it was the community center. You know, where they hold those charmingly pathetic Tuesday night bingo games. Stepping inside, I could hear murmured conversations echoing off the walls. The room was dimly lit, and members were seated in a circle, reminding me of one of those therapy sessions I had to attend post-divorce. You know, the ones where everyone pretends to care while planning dinner in their mind. At the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, standing tall and intimidating. Its surface seemed to ripple like water, capturing reflections that felt off, like looking at a dream. The leader, a tall woman with flowing silver hair whose name, as I learned, was Esmeralda, invited me to an empty chair and signaled the beginning of the meeting. The members, a motley crew of young, old, and everything in between, shared their experiences. Some spoke of mirrors capturing moments that never occurred. Others whispered of seeing strangers stare back. A young woman, couldn't be more than 20, with striking blue eyes and jet black hair, rose to speak.
Last night, I swear, the mirror showed my grandma. She was young, vibrant, and dancing. And the strangest part? She died years before I was born.
The room murmured with a mix of awe and skepticism. I felt an itch at the back of my neck, the kind you get when things are just a tad too weird, or when you forget to change your shirt for a couple of days. After a few more uncanny tales, Esmeralda addressed me directly.
Detective Hale, we understand you're investigating Margot's disappearance. Many of us here were close to her. She was a believer.
I paused, searching for the right words. So I've gathered. Tell me, did she mention anything unusual before she, went absent without leave? Esmeralda looked contemplative.
She spoke of a mirror. Not just any mirror, but one that held answers. One she believed was at her ancestral home.
I scribbled a quick note, the urge to crack a joke too strong to resist. You folks ever consider branching out? Maybe to windows or glass doors? Might offer some variety to your stories. A few polite, if distant, smiles danced around the room. Before leaving, I took one last look at that central mirror. In its reflection, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a younger me, without the paunch, without the gray hair. For a brief second, I wished that reflection was the reality. Night had fallen, and the Eastwood mansion loomed large under the moon's pale glow. I had to return. There was something I missed, a gut feeling. Besides, with Margot's vanishing act and the tales from the Reflection Society, sleep wasn't exactly on my agenda. I jimmied the lock on the back door with an old trick I picked up during a case involving a magician, a rabbit, and a very questionable hat. But let's save that story for another day. The mansion was darker, more silent. Each footstep echoed with foreboding. I pulled out my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a lifeline. As I reached the hall, the mirror seemed even more eerie, if possible. It reflected the room, but at a slightly skewed angle, like a scene from a forgotten past. I could feel my heart pounding, sounding like the drums of an old rock band, probably more out of rhythm than I'd care to admit. The place was a maze, and each room felt colder, more distant than the last. In Margot's study, papers were strewn about. Someone had been here after me. A quick scan showed many of her notes about the mirror missing. Someone else was onto this mystery. I smirked, muttering, "Guess I'm not the only one burning the midnight oil, or in my case, the midnight whiskey." Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to see a shadowy figure. The intruder lunged and we crashed onto the floor, a tangle of arms, legs, and expletives. As we wrestled, the intruder's mask slipped off, revealing Esmeralda, she hissed.
You don't understand, Detective. This isn't just about Margot. This is about a legacy, a power that's been in her family for centuries.
I managed to pin her down, my detective's badge glinting just inches from her face. Exhaling slowly, I said, "You know, I always thought our reunion might take my breath away, but this isn't quite what I had in mind." Her eyes flared with anger, but also fear.
Let me go and I'll explain everything.
I hesitated, then released her, curiosity getting the better of me. As we both caught our breath, I realized the story was far more tangled than I could have imagined. I might have entered the mansion looking for Margot, but now I was ensnared in a web of ancient rituals, family legacies, and dark reflections. Sitting opposite each other in Margot's opulent living room, the air felt heavy to me with the echoes of bygone eras. Esmeralda's features were worn, weary from more than just our little scuffle. The room's chandelier cast eerie shadows, making the atmosphere even more tense. "All right, spill it," I said, rubbing my temples. "You've got 5 minutes before I call this in." Esmeralda's eyes were pools of desperation.
You don't get it. This isn't about a missing woman. It's about a mirror, a gateway. And Margot found the key.
My eyebrows raised in skepticism. Gateway to what? The best-dressed room in the underworld? She shot me a glare.
To the past, Detective. The Eastwood legacy wasn't just wealth, it was time. The mirror can show you your ancestors, their lives, even let you relive certain moments.
I leaned back, crossing my arms. So you're saying Margot went on a little temporal vacation? For what? To escape the routine of her manicure appointments? Esmeralda's frustration was evident.
She got obsessed, Detective. Every family has skeletons and she wanted to uncover them all, but there's a price. Stay too long and you get trapped.
I pondered this for a moment. Why break into her study then? Looking for some antique family jewelry. She sighed deeply.
I was trying to find the counter ritual, a way to bring Margot back before she's lost forever. The Reflection Society. We don't just admire mirrors. We protect their secrets, their powers, and this one, it's the most potent of them all.
We sat in a heavy silence. The idea of delving into one's past literally was both fascinating and terrifying. I mean, I had enough trouble dealing with my high school yearbook photos. Imagine reliving those awkward moments. Finally, I spoke. All right, Esmeralda. Let's say I believe you, and that's a pretty big leap. What's the plan? Her eyes gleamed with a mix of hope and determination.
We need to perform the counter ritual during the next full moon in 2 weeks. It's the only time the mirror's power can be reversed. Given the time, I can devise the exact ritual, but I'll need you to trust in my methods and perhaps assist me just a bit.
I nodded slowly. Okay, lead the way. And just so you know, if this involves chicken sacrifices or interpretive dance, I'm out. She let out a mirthful sound that seemed to echo with centuries of knowledge.
Just be prepared, Detective. What's seen in the mirror can't be unseen.
The game had changed, and the stakes, they were higher than ever. 2 weeks flew by, and I hit a brick wall with the case, finding not a single lead. The night of the full moon arrived with an intensity that electrified the air. I couldn't decide if it was excitement, fear, or just that second slice of Mabel's meat pie acting up. The Eastwood mansion seemed more alive, its stones almost pulsating with anticipation. Esmeralda had instructed me to wear all black, which was a stretch for me. Usually I just settled for slightly clean. We gathered in the grand hall. The huge mirror, now illuminated by candlelight, dominated the room. Its surface shimmered, not with reflection, but anticipation. A low table was set up in front, covered in an assortment of old relics, incense, and, thankfully, no chickens. Esmeralda began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded ancient, each syllable heavy with meaning. The members of the Reflection Society formed a circle around us, joining in the chant, their voices harmonizing in an eerie melody. I felt a tad out of place, like that one time I crashed a wedding thinking it was a retirement party. So, do I just stand here looking pretty? I whispered to Esmeralda during a pause in her singing. She shot me a serious glance.
You need to focus, Detective. Be the anchor. When the mirror opens, it'll try to pull Margot back, and we need to be stronger.
Images flashed. War zones, grand balls, quiet family moments, passionate embraces. The entire Eastwood legacy on display. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared. Margot. She looked lost, her eyes filled with terror, but also wonder. Behind her, a backdrop of a lavish 1800s ball. She seemed trapped in a dance, her partner a shadowy figure that sent chills down my spine. Feeling a sudden surge of energy, I shouted, "Margot, head towards my voice. Come on, don't make me jump in there and ruin this suit." Esmeralda's chanting grew more fervent. The other members joined hands, forming a chain of strength and will. The pull from the mirror was immense, a tidal wave of power threatening to drown us. But then, a breakthrough. Margot's image began moving closer, her form becoming clearer. With one final shared scream between her and Esmeralda, she burst through the mirror, collapsing into our world, seemingly disoriented but alive. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, saying, "Well, that was more intense than my last spin class. And trust me, that's saying something." The mirror stilled, returning to its inert state. The danger was over. But the mysteries it held, they were far from done. Dawn filtered through the mansion's stained glass windows, bathing the room in a mosaic of colors. Margot, looking disheveled and confused, sat on the lavish couch, a blanket draped around her shoulders. I handed her a cup of tea, and she took a hesitant sip, her hands trembling. Esmeralda, looking as exhausted as I felt, approached her.
You went too deep, Margot. You were nearly lost to the past.
Margot's eyes, filled with a mixture of awe and terror, met mine.
It was incredible, Detective. I was dancing with my great-great-grandfather at his engagement ball. But then, everything began to blur. The past and present merged, and I couldn't find my way back home.
I sat next to her, offering a comforting pat on the back. Well, glad you're back in the land of smartphones and bad reality TV. We could use a little less drama around here. Lord knows I've got enough with my dating life. She chuckled weakly, looking like her spirit was still reconnecting with our world. Esmeralda interjected.
The mirror's power is intoxicating, alluring. You wanted to uncover family secrets, but you almost became one.
Margot shuddered.
I know. I saw ancestors, both good and not so good. It's a legacy of power, you know, and love, and, well, betrayal. But I've learned my lesson. Some doors are better left. Closed.
She turned to me, gratitude in her eyes.
Thank you, Detective. It was your voice. Well,
I shrugged, attempting to play it cool. All in a day's work. Though I gotta say, your family's version of a home movie is way too interactive for my taste. Esmeralda, gathering the remnants of the ritual, said,
The Reflection Society will take responsibility for the mirror. Its power is too great, too dangerous to remain here.
Margot nodded in agreement.
take it. I want nothing more to do with it.
As the society members set about moving the mirror, I took a moment to reflect. The line between past and present, reality and fantasy, was thinner than I'd ever imagined. And while I was no stranger to danger, this case had brought me face to face with the unknown, the unfathomable. Margot, now steadier on her feet, approached me.
So, Detective, what's next for you?
I grinned. Probably a nap. Then maybe dive into a case that involves jaywalking or a missing cat. Something light. She laughed, the sound warm and full of life.
Take care, Jonathan Hale.
The Eastwood mansion dwindled in my rearview mirror, but the burden of the night's discoveries hung heavy. I hadn't expected my life, already a cavalcade of the bizarre, to include a pinch of time travel. The dashboard clock blinked, its numbers a steady reminder of time's passage. Simple, linear, and uncomplicated, just how I liked it. Margot's face flashed in my mind, that mix of vulnerability and strength. She had tasted the allure of the past, danced with it, nearly got swallowed by it. I admired her resilience. To experience history firsthand, confront it, and then choose to come back to reality. That took guts. I chuckled to myself, remembering my feeble attempt at levity. World of Wi-Fi and overpriced coffee. Classic Hale. I needed humor, dark and sometimes absurd, as my shield. The world could be a terrifying place full of hidden corners and untold mysteries. I needed to armor up. As I parked in front of my modest apartment building, the city's sounds welcomed me back. A stray cat yowling, the distant blare of a siren, the low hum of nightlife. It was comforting. My world. Familiar and predictable. Pouring myself a stiff drink, I mused over the mirror's charm. It was human nature to be curious about our roots, to seek connections, to find where our stories began. But at what cost? Margot learned the hard way. Some doors should remain shut, their secrets untouched. I raised my glass, toasting the silent night. Here's to the present, and to mysteries best left unsolved. Drinking deeply, I felt a renewed appreciation for the now. The past, with its temptations and threats, was behind me. The future, uncertain and full of potential, awaited. But for tonight, I was content just being Jonathan Hale, a simple detective, living in the moment.